Hello and welcome to Clipping In. Today we're going to have a look at the SIDI Frost 2 GoreTex winter mountain biking boot. I've put about 250 miles now into these boots over a reasonable range of what you might call typical British cycling winter weather. And it's given me some good ideas about what I like about them and, well, what I don't like about them. So let's have a talk about those today. So the Frost 2 are pitched as winter mountain bike boots for cold and muddy months. SIDI don't actually put a temperature range or anything like that. But, you know, foot comfort is exceptionally subjective. I know the sort of conditions that I've used them in, which are really going to be typical of a British, Irish, Northern European cycling winter. Let's have a look at what we've actually got first. So you can see here we've got this synthetic leather and mesh upper, a high ankle cuff, you can see there. Typical Velcro strap, SIDI's what they call a techno dial, which is their version of a boa. It's been going a long time. They've used techno dials for 30 years maybe. And then this part of the ankle cuff here is partly plastic, you can see there. It's partly plastic, partly mesh, and then they've got this neoprene fastening strap there to tighten everything up. This one, as I mentioned, is the mountain bike boot, so you can see it has a typical SPD sole unit. You've got the cleats, you've got a replaceable toe piece there, a fixed heel unit, and the little cleat surrounds. So it's not a problem walking. You can walk on stone floors, you can walk on railway stations or whatever. I'd say that if you were doing a lot of actual hiking on rough ground, these might not be ideal for that because the heel is quite narrow and therefore not as stable as some shoes that are, well, better suited to hiking. But for a normal kind of duty cycle, they're absolutely fine. There is a road-going version called a 02, and that has a smooth sole, no attempt at creating a tread, and they have the classic 3-bolt triangular arrangement for cleats, SPD SL or the classic look style. But I switched over really when I came back to cycling after all my injury problems, which there's a video in itself there. But after all that, when I came back, I made the switch to mountain bike SPD for everything basically, apart from the indoor trainer where I do still use look cleats. Now, what I would say, SIDI described this sole as the SR17. It's some kind of injected stiffened nylon. And I was quite pleased to see that because my summer shoes are their Trace 2 mountain bike shoe. And that also has the SR17 sole unit, as you can see. The main difference being that I take a European 47 in a summer shoe, and I bought a European 48 in the winter boot. So bear that in mind too when I talk about any shoe weights later on. They're like barges, unavoidably so. As I say, with the SR17 sole pattern being common to both, it made setting up quite easy for me because I could more or less copy the cleat position from the Trace across to the Frost and then just adjust them slightly with one or two tune-up rides. Bear in mind that SIDI shoes have a fit and a last shape all of their own. Some people just don't get along with SIDIs. They find them narrow in the wrong places. They find that there's a curvature that they can't get on with. For me, it's not really a problem because I got my first SIDIs in 1997, SIDI Techno, which are here. I hope you can see that. These old faithfuls, 1997, goodness me. And these were obviously road going. You put an insert, look cleat. The heel units have worn out now, but these have done many thousands of miles. So I know what I'm getting into. And if we can compare, they have that similar narrow heel with a curved last, and their mountain bike shoes are actually quite similar. You know, I would imagine that some people would criticize their mountain bike shoes for being too like a road shoe. The winter mountain bike boot, the Frost 2, also has what you'd call a bellows tongue, which means that if we can see that there, it's going to be difficult on this camera perhaps, but they have the tongue is attached to the sides here, all the way up, which helps to prevent water ingress and also makes them a little snugger and a little more windproof, I think. That's quite common on a lot of hiking boots, so transferring that across to a winter mountain bike boot makes perfect sense to me. Now the Frost 2, it doesn't have any insulation as such. You know, if you look at some mountain bike boots that are more suited or they're aimed at, you know, Alaskan mountain biking or something, they'll have maybe Primaloft, or they'll have some kind of Thinsulate, or they'll have a more complicated construction with insulation included between the layers. These don't have that. They have what I would call, from the hiking boot world, a Cambrel liner. Then there's GoreTex for windproof and waterproofing, and then the outer of the boot itself. It does have an insulating effect. The footbed has a kind of a felt covering too, which has an insulating effect. It's a thicker footbed than you'd find in a summer SIDI. So there are some touches that are insulating, but it's not advertised or marketed as an insulated boot. Just going back to that SIDI last shape that I've spoken about with the narrow heel and the curvature, I think really if you've never had SIDIs before, you should really try them on somewhere. You should go to a retailer and try them on. There might be somewhere, I've not looked into it, where you can download a scaled PDF, print that out, put your socks on that you're going to wear at winter, and stand on a template, and that will then guide you towards the SIDI size that you need. I'm not sure if that exists. I know it exists for certain climbing and mountaineering boots that you can buy online. There might be something similar in the winter cycling shoe or cycling shoes in general. I'm not sure. It's something to look into. Failing that, you should really try them on in a real-life shop. So if I look at the weights, I mentioned earlier on, I've weighed some various shoes. These Frost 2 in the 48, they weigh 1,050 grams. The Trace 2 in a 47, they weigh 907 grams. The Techno that I mentioned from 1997, they weigh 785 grams. And then some other old campaigners that I bought in 1998, the SIDI Genius 3 road shoe, they weigh 800 grams. This is a memory trick for you. Remember this for later on. I have some 4mm neoprene over boots. They weigh 204 grams. They'll be making an appearance in a little while. So whilst performance is always going to be subjective, some people will feel the cold in their feet before their hands or their head. Certainly that's the case with me. I start to feel uncomfortable really when we get into single-digit Fahrenheit in my feet, whereas with my hands I can wear track mitts almost down to freezing, but my feet, they start to complain much earlier. And you know, for that reason I'm always interested in just getting that little bit more comfort at winter. And particularly the British winter, we vary between, you've got the wind chill effect, which is always there. You've got the humidity, which is very high. But you've also got some days, like this recent cold snap, where we are sub-zero in terms of mercury, never mind wind chill. You can consult Celsius wind chill charts all over the net, but I wrote one figure down: 0 Celsius at 60 kilometers an hour. So that's a typical sort of fast Pennine descent, and you've got a wind chill equivalent temperature of -10 Celsius. That's how important the wind chill is. You know, I think I've said it before, but I think it's one of the biggest enemies really for a cyclist. Often, I'm sure you'll have seen the same. You're out cycling and you're feeling the cold, and then you look, and then there's a jogger, and they're all, you know, joggers might be wearing shorts and just a kind of a sweat top. You think, are they completely impervious to the cold? But it's not that. They're moving. Firstly, there are more muscles being activated. They're generating more heat than a typical cyclist, but also they don't have that wind chill effect, because you know, even a decent runner at winter, they're not going much above 10 miles an hour. You know, unless you live near a Kenyan training camp or something. Whereas we can be doing 30, 35, 40 miles an hour. The other week on one of the test rides that I used the Frost 2 for, I was on top of Home Moss. Another cyclist told me it was 2 Celsius up there. And shortly after finishing that conversation, I was descending at 40 miles an hour. at 2 Celsius. So you can imagine that the wind chill effect was sky high. And that's the sort of thing that winter cycling shoes have to cope with. All winter kit, but particularly winter cycling shoes. So I mentioned that I've done about 250 miles in them. I've used them for, I think the longest ride was about 63, 64 miles. I've done some in the mid-50s. I've done quite a lot of rides in that 35 to 40 miles. And temperatures have ranged from the last couple of days when I've gone out at -1 and it stayed at -1. I've done 2 hours in those temperatures. I've had days that have started at maybe 3 or 4 Celsius and have warmed up to 11. And just about everything in between. And what I found with the Frost 2, wearing 2 pairs of socks and then putting the Frost 2 straight on, I personally am comfortable in them under all circumstances down to about 3 Celsius or 4 Celsius. Below that, my feet do start to feel a little bit chilly. And that's where, memory test, I boost them with these 4mm neoprene overshoes, overboots, and adding those really boosts the combination. I mean, like today, -1 for 2 hours, and my feet were, I'm not going to say too warm, but they were so snug, it was incredible. So I think it's quite good having a modular system. You know, you've got something here that can go from, let's say, +3 up to +12. And then you add these, and now you're comfortable down at -1, -2, -3. Certainly as cold as anything that I'm going to cycle in during a British winter. If we get some really freak temperatures where it's -5 or -10, they're so short-lived in this country that I can just avoid them, and I think most people can. So I think it makes more sense to pitch your equipment to the typical conditions that you're going to encounter. Otherwise, we'll get onto value for money in a little while, but otherwise you're going to spend quite an outlay and you're going to use them really comfortably maybe half a dozen times in a winter. Whereas these seem to be pitched much more at a Northern European type winter with the range of temperatures that I've described. I've noticed, I looked at the SIDI master website earlier before starting this video, and it looks like the Frost 2 and the 02 are no longer current models. They had 2 definite winter booties. One was called an Algor, which had Primaloft insulation and a very smooth, almost a built-in overshoe, designed, I think, to shed snow and rain and sleet. And then they had another one which, forgive my Italian, but I think it's Glacis, and that is more of a high-top shoe with an ankle gaiter. But again, they say that it's insulated and it has GoreTex. So that might be the replacement for the Frost 2. It's worth mentioning that these, if you look around online, you'll find places still selling the Frost 2 at full RRP, which is 270. But similarly, if you also look around, you'll find places selling them at 135, 140, half retail price. Needless to say, as a thrifty Yorkshireman, I got them at under half price. Bought them in July during what passes for a summer in this country, and they're only finally now coming out. But yeah, great addition to the cycling wardrobe so far. Prices of these things, it's always going to be how much are they worth to you. You know, how cold do your feet get? How determined are you to get out on those days? Do you want to basically wind blister your feet or pick up chilblains that stay with you for weeks on end? All these kinds of issues, only you can decide, and only you know how much you suffer with cold feet. SIDI have always been a premium brand, let's call it that. Going back to those shoes that I mentioned, the Genius 3, I bought those in 1998 and they were £100. And if you apply CPI, RPI, inflation calculator, I think £100, 26 years later, will come out somewhere in the 220, 230 bracket. And I think really, you know, I'm not justifying these being 270 RRP, but it's in keeping with the SIDI brand. It's also interesting to note that the Techno and the Genius were made in Italy. My SR17 sold Trace 2, which I think is their sort of bottom of entry range mountain bike shoe. These are made in Romania, but the Frost 2 are also made in Italy. So I'm not sure what the reasoning behind that is, and whether that's reflected in the prices. I really don't know. On the subject of prices and value for money, I actually made a video of sort of tips and low-cost tricks and modifications to your shoes. I did that in December last year, sort of warm winter feet tips, the idea being that it wasn't a huge outlay to do that. Rather than spending your way to a solution, you could do it on the cheap. I'll put a link to that up there. If you haven't seen it, it's 9 minutes of investment in keeping your feet warm. We touched on this idea of value for money. I think where the Frost 2 will score is it's the basis of a system, and realistically you can start using them because they're not too warm on their own, from, like we said, 3 Celsius up to 11 or 12. You can start using them mid-October, and because they're nice and sleek and they're not particularly heavy, you can use them right through to mid-March really without any drawbacks. And for that reason, using them as the basis of a system, you're going to get a lot of wear out of them. So you outlay 130, 135 if you pick them up on promotion, and yet you get 5 months of use out of them. Now, if you went what you might call to the worst case scenario and you bought something that were more suitable for North American winters or Alaskan cycling, you might find that you'll only use them half a dozen times in a British winter because our conditions are simply not that cold, and we have humidity and rain and all the rest to consider, whereas some of those super insulated Alaskan mountain bike boots might not be able to cope with those conditions, because very often what we're talking about in North America, from my experience in Wisconsin and places like that, it's very cold, but it's also very dry. The humidity is not a factor. So I think it makes more sense to buy something at the core of a system that you can then modify, like I'm talking about with the neoprenes. You've got a modular system. So I'm mindful of running time, as always. I don't want to waffle on and brag about my super new mountain bike boots. I've told you roughly what I like about them. I've told you the conditions that I've used them in, and I can't really find any drawbacks apart from you don't want to do much hiking in them. I'd say that if you were wearing them in very heavy rain, this Velcro neoprene combination on the ankle cuff, no matter how tightly you pull it, there's a little gap. I think they've done that on purpose, to be honest, and I think it's designed for no matter how economical your pedal stroke is, I think there's a bit of fore-aft movement in that pedal stroke, and if you really strap in the way that, say, a pair of mountain bikes would, that clamp your ankle and your calf together, I think you'd find that obstructive and uncomfortable for a cycling pedal stroke. That's my theory anyway, because when I have used mountaineering boots for mountain biking, for cycling, I found them very, very uncomfortable and very, very restrictive. But in heavy rain, and I've used them in drizzle at 6 degrees and they've been superb, and they dry out very quickly too, which is always a concern with anything involving a GoreTex membrane, but these are superb. I didn't have to force dry them. They were fine for using next day. But I would think in very heavy rain, even with guards on your bike, it would be wise to add neoprenes to cover that potential source of water ingress on the SIDI Frost as is. But aside from that, I can't really find any faults. What I'll do, so that I'm not trying to cover all kinds of bases, as always, comment section is open. Questions, as always, I'll answer to the best of my ability. And so for this spotlight on the SIDI Frost 2, I'll sign off, say goodbye for now, and see you soon back out on the Yorkshire roads. Bye-bye.